In this video, you're going to set up a dedicated route for logging in existing users. Currently, the only way you can get an XAuth token back is on the signup call. If you lose the token or you sign in from a different device, obviously you're going to want to be able to get a new one, and currently that is just not possible. You can't make another call to the post users route because the email already exists, so the call is going to return a 400. What we need is a dedicated route for logging in users. Now down below, this is going to be a post route. And the URL we're going to use for this is /users/login. When you make a post request to this route, you'll be sending along some data. You're going to send along an email in the request body and also the plain text password. This means that we're going to need to try to find a user in the MongoDB users collection who, one, has an email matching the email sent in, and two, has a hashed password that equals the plain text password when passed through the bcrypt compare method, which we used over inside of our hashing.js file. Right here, we used bcrypt compare to compare a plain text value with a hashed value. That's exactly what we're going to be doing to get this call to work. And setting up this route is going to be your first challenge. I want you to set up this route, then pick off the email and the password from the request body. And to verify that the route is set up correctly, you can simply go ahead and respond using response.send, and you can send back the body data. Then I want you to fire up your server, make the login call in Postman, passing in an email and a password, and make sure you get the email and password back. Take a moment to knock this out, test it, and when you're done, go ahead and click play. All right, to get this done, what I'm going to do is call app.post. We want to set up that post route. Then I can provide the URL /users/login. Now this is going to be a standard express route. We're not going to be using the Authenticate middleware because you don't have a token. You're trying to get one. That's the whole purpose of this call. We're going to have the request and response arguments inside of our callback function. And the first thing we're going to do is pick off the email and the password. Now we've written this line before. There's no reason to rewrite it. I can simply copy and paste it down below. Now the last thing I wanted you to do just to make sure the data was getting picked off properly is simply respond response.send, sending back the body. Then we can go ahead and start up our server. I'm going to use nodemon to do that. Nodemon server/server.js. Once the server is up and you see you're started at port 3000 message, you can move over to Postman and actually make a login request. I'm going to make a post request to the local URL. I can inject the URL right here, /users/login. Then I'm going to send some body data along as well. This is going to be JSON data. We're going to provide our two properties inside of our JSON object. First up is going to be the email. I'm going to set this to andrew@example.com and a password, which I'll set to whatever I like. 123 abc@. Now that I have this in place, I can go ahead and send off my request, and down below, I do indeed get the data back. I have the email, and the password's not showing up below because I misspelt it up above. If I go ahead and spell it correctly, I now get the password also. If you have this in place, then you're ready to move on, actually filling out the route. Now, the first thing we need to do is verify that a user exists with that email. Then we're going to go ahead and get its password property and pass that through bcrypt compare. Now, all of this is going to happen inside of another model method. We're going to create a model method just like we have in users. We have an existing model method. It is called findByToken. We're going to make a separate one called findByCredentials. This is going to take the email and password as arguments. It's then going to do its thing, returning a promise with the user or with an error if the user didn't exist. Right here, we can define that method, user schema.statics for a model method, and this one will be called findByCredentials. Now, findByCredentials, as I mentioned, is going to take two arguments, and I am going to use the function keyword because we do need access to the this binding as we have for all of our other methods. Right here, we're going to have our email argument as well as our password argument. Then we can go ahead and set up the function, and now we can call it over inside of server.js. I'm going to call it so I know kind of how I want it to work before I actually fill it out over here. inside of server.js, we can essentially call it and define how it's going to work. This is a strategy I use pretty often. I like to write my method call first so I can figure out exactly what I want the method to do. Then I go ahead and write the method to fit my needs. In this case, my needs are the ability to pass an email and password and get the user back. User.findByCredentials is going to be the method we'll be calling, and we'll be passing in the body email property as well as the body password property. Next up, what I'd like to be able to do is add a call to then once we find the user. The success case should get that user back. And right here is where we would go ahead and create a new token responding to the HTTP request. Now, if we're not able to find the user, that's fine too. I'm going to add a catch call. We're going to get that error argument, and right here is where we can respond to the user, letting them know that we were not able to log in. Now, before I go any further, I am going to go ahead and actually define find by credentials. I know how I want it to work, and now it's time to fill the method out. Inside of here, one of the first things we need to do is simply try to find a user where the email equals the email that was passed in. Now, it would be nice if we could do that for email and password, but unfortunately we can't. Remember, we have the plain text password. We do not have the password actually stored in the database, so we can't simply query the data. In order to find a potential match, we're going to find the user that does have the email of the email passed in. Now, there's going to be nothing new here. We're going to make a variable uppercase U user, setting it equal to this. This is exactly what we did for our find by token method. And then we can go ahead and make a call to user.find1. We're going to try to find one user, the user whose email matches the email we have right here. That means inside of our query, all we have to do is reference email like this. This is going to set an email property equal to the email variable. Now, I am going to be returning this. We're going to be chaining this promise since I added a then call and a catch call over here in server.js. And on here, we are going to tack on a then call because there is still more work to be done. We're not quite done. We have to verify that the password also matches. All of that is going to happen inside of here. Now, we might get a user, we might not. Either way, we are going to specify the user argument. If we don't get a user, we want to do something different. We don't want to try to compare passwords since there is no password to compare. If there is no user, what are we going to do? We're simply going to return a rejected promise. This is going to automatically trigger the catch case over here in server.js, and we can respond with an error. Now, back inside of user.js, we are going to return a call to promise.reject. Excellent. Now we already handled the case where the user doesn't exist. It's time to move on and figure out what to do when a user does exist. Now, the problem we're going to run into here is that the bcrypt method we're going to be using, bcrypt.compare, it only supports callbacks. In fact, all of the bcrypt.js library methods only support callbacks. They do not support promises. I want to keep using promises. I've been using them through the whole app. They're my preferred way to make asynchronous code work. So what I'm going to do instead is return a new promise like we did in previous sections. Here, we're going to provide our function. We can either call resolve if it's a success. We can call reject if it's not a success. And in here, we can do whatever we like. In our case, the thing that we're going to do in here is use bcrypt.compare to compare the password right here with the user.password property. Now that means over inside of server.js, we are going to be able to do something with the user when it comes back. For the moment, all we're going to do is respond with the user response.send, sending in the user that got found. Now notice here I'm not using an if statement to check if user exists or not. We created the find by credentials method so we get to determine how it works. If there is no user, the catch case is going to get fired. That's exactly what we did when we set up this if statement right here. Back inside of server.js, inside of catch, we're going to respond with a 400 status. And I'm going to go ahead and call send to send the response. Now with this in place, we're not quite done in terms of what we're going to add to server.js. We do still need to create an authentication token. That's going to happen in a few minutes. But for now, we have enough in server.js where your challenge can be to complete the find by credentials method. Right here, you're going to use bcrypt.compare. Use bcrypt.compare to compare password and user.password. If the result is true, that means you did find a user and you can call resolve with the user we found right here. If the result is false, meaning that the password and the hashed password are not matches, you can just call the reject method, which we have defined right here, and that will trigger the catch case over inside of server.js. That means all you really need to put inside of here where the comment is the compare call, just like we have over inside of our hashing file. Instead of logging out the response, you're going to go ahead and check if it's true or false. If it's true, you'll call resolve with the user. If it's false, you're going to call reject. Take a moment to knock that out, and then I want you to test it as well. Now, you can feel free to completely wipe your RoboMongo database. Then inside of Postman, you can make a new user. Then you can try to log in with those exact same credentials, and what you should get back is the user object, since we send it back right here. Then I'd also like you to mess up either the email or the password and make sure you get a 400 back. So take a moment to try to knock this out. Feel free to use anything we've done in any of our projects to solve this problem. When you're done, test it, make sure everything works as expected, then you can go ahead and click play. How'd that go? I know that one was a little tricky, but hopefully you were able to get it done and you were able to test it inside of Postman. The first thing I'm going to do is call bcrypt.compare. Now, we've already used bcrypt in this file. We used it when we created our account, so there is no reason to go ahead and import it again. It's already up there. Down inside of the challenge area, we can now pass in the 3 necessary arguments. The first one, as we know, is the plain password, and we have access to that via the argument password. Next up, we have to pass in the hashed password. This is available on user.password, and the final argument is our callback function with our 2 arguments. Now inside of here, we need to check if the value of response is true or false. If the response variable is true, we want to go ahead and resolve this promise. We want to resolve it with the user. This is going to let us do stuff with the user over inside of server.js like we do right here. If the result variable is not true, we can add an else clause. In that case, we're going to simply call reject, rejecting the promise, and this is going to send a 400 back. With this in place, we are ready to test that everything is working as expected. I'm going to save the file, and inside of RoboMongo, I'm going to go ahead and wipe the to-do app collection so I can recreate my users inside of Postman. Then inside of Postman, we can go ahead and make a sign-up request. I'm going to create that in a new tab. We can just click our post users request over inside of our collection sidebar, and I am going to check out the data because I need to use these exact same credentials in just a few minutes. Here we have andrew@example.com as the email, and we have password ! as the password. Now I can send off this request. This is going to create a new account. We get our ID and our email, and we get our XAuth header over here. The goal now is to use these exact same credentials over inside of our login request. Up above, I'm going to go ahead and change the password. The email is already correct. I'm going to change it to password ! and we can send off this request. And what do we get down below? We get a status of 200 and we get the user object back, which is fantastic. Notice here we're getting the exact same user. The ID matches the ID we have inside of our response body for the sign up call. Now that we have this in place, we can go ahead and test what happens when we send a bad password, like password without an exclamation mark. In that case, we get a 400. We can also try to fetch a user whose email doesn't even exist. If I send that off, what do we get? We get a 400 as well. Now I'm going to change this back to the working example, and we can go ahead and save this request. If I send it off, I can verify everything is working as expected, and I'm going to add it to my to-do app collection. We're going to use the same scheme we've been using for all of our routes, and we're going to go ahead and save them into the same collection. And with this in place, we are ready to move on to the very final step. The final step inside of Atom is going to be to actually generate a new token and send it back. And we're going to use the exact same generate auth token method. There is no reason to create a new one. This is why we created the method in the first place. We created it to be reusable. Right here inside of our success case for when we do find the user, we, instead of actually responding, are going to call user.generate auth token. And then we can go ahead and tack on a then callback. And in here, we'll be getting the new token that was just created. Now with this in place, we can go ahead and return. This is going to keep the chain alive. So if we do run into any errors inside of the callback right here, the 400 will be used as the response. Now inside of here, the only thing we need to do is respond. And we're going to respond in literally the exact same way we responded up above. So much so that I can actually take the line, copy it, and paste it down below right inside of generate auth token. Here we use response.header to set the xauth header. We set it equal to the token we just generated, and finally we send the response body back as the user, which we were already doing. With this in place, we can now save server.js for the final time and test that everything works as expected. Over inside of Postman, what we need to do is make another login request, one that is valid, and down here inside of headers, we should now have the xauth value. I can take this value and make a request to get users me to verify that it is indeed a valid token. I'm going to head over to the users me request and swap out the xauth token value for the one I just copied to the clipboard. I'm going to send it off, and right down here we get the user back, which is fantastic. This means that the login call is indeed working. The token it sends back does work with our other private routes. Now that we have this in place, we are done with the login route. In the next video, we're going to write some test cases for the login route, but for now we are done. We can go ahead and wrap this one up by making a commit. I'm going to make sure all my Atom files are saved. It looks like they are. Over inside of the terminal, I can now shut down nodemon and run git status. Here we have our two changed files as expected, which means we can go ahead and use git commit with the AM flag. And a good message for this one would be add post users login route. I'm going to make the commit, push it up to GitHub, and that is it for this one. I will see you next time where we test the route we just created.